Hey there crew, it's Mark. Just got the Halloween kit from Archer and Olive. We're gonna take a real brief look through this box. There's some pretty cool things inside of here, and we talked about everything inside of there inside of my overview video for the Halloween collection, which I'll go ahead and pop a card up here for you right now. But more importantly, what we're gonna focus on today is going to be the calligraphy set that came as a part of this box. Once these boxes started to arrive, I got a lot of questions of how do I use this thing? What are these nibs for? Like, what is this? As a person who bullet journals and uses fountain pen inks, calligraphy, dip pens, all of that, I'm gonna show you exactly how to set this pen up today and use the calligraphy nibs and ink inside of your bullet journal. There's no doubt about it, this box is nothing short of amazing. The design on everything inside of here just really hit the mark, and I'm super excited about it all. The notebook inside of here was a beautiful red blood moon. We've got the reflection and the bats, all the cool stuff on top of here. Really excited to eventually use this notebook for myself. The decorative tapes, on point. Super excited to see all of these, and I believe that some of them go in the dark too, which is pretty cool. Some more cool packaging design. This is going to be the little tiny notepad that came inside of here, which is pretty neat. Open that up and you can see we've got 3 different colors inside of here. And we also had the stickers that came a part of this set too, just kind of bringing everything together. But this box right here, this is what is giving some people a little bit of trouble. Again, with the awesome packaging design on this one, and inside of here, oh, so excited about this. We have our dip pen here. So this is awesome. Looks like a wand. Very excited about it. We also got 3 inks that were inside of here and 2 nibs. And I think what's tripping people up the most about this is actually the nib holder itself. When it comes to nib holders, there's a few different mechanisms that hold them together. This one I call the claw. And the reason is that your nib that goes inside of here has to kind of fit on the outside of that rim. And that's what's gonna hold your nib in place when you're writing with it. But the thing is that sometimes these are a little off a little bit, and it's difficult to try to fit your nib inside of there, or it feels like it's not really fitting in. So you just have to be careful, kind of move it around a little bit until it goes all the way into place. There are some pen companies out there like River City Pen Company. They use a little bit of a different mechanism here. It's the same general shape, but the difference is that it just goes a lot smoother into the nib holder when you're using it. These are 2 other nib holders that I have that use the same type of claw mechanism to hold them in. So like I said, it's pretty standard. This is not something special to Archer and Olive. Now that we got that out of the way, we have our nib connected to our nib holder, this very cool looking magic wand looking deal. Well, now what do we do? How do we use these? What are these nibs and how do I use them with the inks? So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the nibs and the inks and how to use these inside of your bullet journal. All right, when it comes to nibs, there are a lot of different type of nibs that are out there, and there's some very cool looking, ornate looking ones. This is a really cool, intricate looking one. It says Hunt Imperial on it, and it has number 10 on it. And some of my favorite are ones from Speedball because they put the name and kind of the number right on here. And the way that these work is essentially the higher the number, the smaller the tip of that nib is going to be when you're writing with it. I think the best example are going to be with these B sizes here. The B0 is this giant, huge nib that's going to give you a really super thick line. The B3 is going to be kind of in the middle, and you've got something as small as a B6 that's going to do that. And all of these B sizes are going to have kind of a rounded monoline edge to it. So when we look at the calligraphy nibs that came inside of the Archer and Olive kit, you're going to see more of a pointed one, and then you're going to see that rounded one, that B one that's going to have that monoline to it. So these are going to do 2 very different things, and so it's important to pay attention to those nibs so you know what you get when you're using them. You press down with a bit more pressure, this is going to open up in here, which is going to let more ink come through, which is going to give you that thicker line, and less pressure is going to keep it nice and thin. Whereas this size over here, that's going to really just keep it in that monoline look. This is actually one of my favorites, but we'll take a look at both of them so you know what they're going to look like. All right, so we have the nib holder handle. We've talked a little bit about the different nibs, and we'll take a look at those. But the next thing we do need to talk about is going to be the calligraphy inks, because these are different than fountain pen inks. So what came inside of this are 3 different calligraphy inks. And the difference between a calligraphy ink and something like a fountain pen ink is mostly going to be in the consistency of this, and usually it's the type of ink as well that's being used. A calligraphy ink, I like to think of in regards to something like paint, right? It's going to be more of an acrylic base to it, which is going to look beautiful. It's going to dry very well. It's going to be waterproof, right? That is what a calligraphy ink is. You do not want to put calligraphy ink inside of a fountain pen. However, fountain pen ink is a little bit more versatile in the standpoint that you can use this along with your dip pen here, and you can also put this type of fountain pen ink into a fountain pen because this one is more water-based and cleans out a lot easier. So it's just important to know the difference between the two, and we'll also take a look at the difference of what they look like on paper too, just to give you a little bit of a better idea. So inside the box, we have a Blood Moon red, which is going to be absolutely stunning. We also have a glow-in-the-dark ink, and we also had a soot black ink as well. All right, so both the soot and the red Blood Moon have shimmer inside of them. And we can see that by flipping them upside down and taking a look. And here you can see all that beautiful glittery goodness that's in there. Now, the thing is that as you are using inks, or not using inks is the better way to say about it, all of those little particles, they're just suspended inside of the ink. So they are not always fully distributed inside of the ink. So what I like to do is just give it a little bit of a shake, and you'll see that all of that shimmer is going to go ahead and kind of come out of the bottom of here, and it's going to start to distribute inside of the ink. But what's going to happen is that as soon as I flip it this way, over time, all of that shimmer is going to go ahead and it's going to try to collect again down here at the bottom. So just a little tip for you is that anytime you're using an ink with a shimmer in it, you do have to give it a little bit of a shake, but know that you might have to kind of swirl your ink up a little bit every time that you use it. So that way you just make sure that you're incorporating some of that shimmer into your ink. But if you're not worried about that, you just want like a little bit of shimmer, just leave it as is. Don't worry about doing that any more than you need to. What's great about this ink is you can use it in anything that you want, and I'm just going to go ahead and use a notepad for this example, but you can use the calligraphy ink and fountain pen ink inside of your bullet journal. We just have to be a little careful of a handful of things that we'll talk about. The most important thing when we talk about using ink inside of a bullet journal is all going to be about how much ink is going from our pen onto the paper. Arch and Olive notebook paper is 160 GSM, which is great. It works wonderful for pens, but inks can be a little trickier. So let's go ahead and let's use the Blood Moon red because this is something new. Now, this ink comes with a stopper on it. And this is something that's very important whenever you're using ink, especially anything that can splash anywhere, is we want to just make sure that we're protecting ourselves a little bit. I have just this reusable ink cloth that you can see. It has stamp ink and everything all over it. You can also just use a paper towel if you want. The whole thing is that as we're undoing this, the ink is going to come out on you. It's inside the ink. It's there. It's going to get on your fingers. It's going to be what it is. Usually when you're dealing with these ink bottles, you usually don't need to put the stopper back onto here whenever you're using it. However, I've had a little bit of an accident myself with this, is that when I was shaking up this ink to get some of that glitter moving around, it got stuck kind of in the threading here. So when I uncapped it, went all over the place. So this is just one of those things that just gotta let you know, calligraphy ink, fountain pen ink, it is fun, but sometimes it can get a little bit messy. So that's why I love to like keep everything to the side, open it up, prepare it before I bring it closer to my notebook. Now that we've got our ink uncorked, we've given it a little bit of a spin to get some of that shimmer kind of moving around in there. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take our calligraphy nib, we're gonna start with the pointed one here, and we're just gonna dip it into the bottle. You are likely gonna need to tip this just a little bit, so just make sure that you're being careful. The goal with these nibs is you just want some of the ink to collect underneath here. This is where the ink actually holds on to whenever you're using a dip pen. You'll also see some on the top here. But just know, the whole point of this type of dip pen and calligraphy ink is that you're not gonna be able to write for long periods of time. It's kind of for short lettering, really. Now with these calligraphy nibs, you can just write normal. You don't have to write in any kind of special fancy handwriting if you don't want to. So I'm gonna go ahead and just write out the word task. What I like with this one is that you are gonna get just some of those variances in the thicks and the thins as you're writing with it. But if you don't wanna write in cursive, you don't have to. But if you do want to write in cursive and get those thicks and thins in calligraphy, it's important to know how this nib works. So as we're pulling down, we're going to put a little bit of pressure, and that's going to give you a thicker line on your page. It's not going to be super thick, but you can see the difference, because if I don't put a lot of pressure, I'm going to get a nice thin line. But as soon as I put a little bit more pressure, you'll see we get a little bit of a thicker line. And then your upstroke is going to be thinner usually. It's going to go up with no pressure, down with some pressure, up with no, down with some. The A would be up, down with some pressure. And then as soon as you start to see the line kind of disconnect here when you're coming down, that means that you need some more ink. The other important part is anytime that you're using calligraphy ink or even fountain pen ink with your nibs and nib holders is you want to make sure that when you're done with it, you want to clean it off. To do that, it's super easy. You're just going to take your nib, you're going to take a glass of water, and you're going to go ahead and swish it around inside of here. You can use a paper towel, but I actually recommend a microfiber cloth instead because the little pieces of your paper towel can get caught inside of your nib here when you're cleaning it. So if I'm using paper towel, I just make sure that I'm always pushing away from the opening and not into the opening. Also, while you're writing with this type of nib, if at any point you realize that you're getting like inconsistent lines, sometimes just pay attention to the tip of the nib and you'll see little pieces of paper particles that can get caught in here from when we're dragging it across the paper. So you can also just kind of run your fingers through here and just make sure that those are pulled out. Just be sure not to bend it too much because you don't want to permanently open this up. Also, a really handy tip when you're using the ink and anything is if at any point this ink drips on your desktop or whatever, just grab it, clean it up as quickly as you can with some water. Again, this is ink. You're gonna get a little bit messy, but we're just having fun. So we'll take a little bit of a closer look here just to show you what this looks like on the paper. You do get a little bit of that shimmer inside of here. Now, if you're noticing around the edges of this here, you'll see that it looks like it's blurring a little bit. And that's called feathering. That's gonna happen a little bit, especially with Archer and Olive paper. It's not that big of a deal, but just something to pay attention to is that if you're writing anything out with this calligraphy ink, it might look different depending on the notebook that you're using. All right, next we're gonna use this B-size nib here. Again, I know it's B because it has a nice rounded edge on it. Remember, this is going to look very different than this looked over here. This is using more of a pointed nib, so it's gonna get more of those nice thin lines as you're writing with it. This is gonna be more of your mono line, so it's gonna be kind of like that single line shape the entire time you're writing with it. You're not gonna get those thicks and those thins. We're gonna do the same exact thing we did for the other ink. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna dip the tip inside of here. We're just trying to get some of that ink onto our nib, and then we can start to write with it. So this one, again, is not going to be those thicks and thins. Instead, you're going to get something more along the lines of this single mono line. Clearly the difference between these two is this is going to be a lot thicker, a lot bolder. You're going to need more space between your letters. So it's really important to know that when you're working with this one. The smaller nib one, the kind of more fine tip, you get a lot closer with your letters. So just make sure you're giving yourself the space that you need. What's also really important about this is going to be the placement of your hand as you're writing. Because this has that flat circle on it, you want to make sure that that flat circle is touching your paper. If you're too far up, you're going to get a different kind of shape or a line. So as much as you can, that hand placement is going to be really important. And that way you're getting the consistency of your lines as you're writing with them. You can see why I like writing with this one so much. I think this is such more of a fun font. So really headers work great for this here instead of something like this if you want to, but all depends on your aesthetic. As we clean up, we're also just gonna go ahead and make sure that the cork is back onto this bottle here. Make sure that cap is on there tight. We're gonna grab our water, we're gonna grab our nib, we're gonna go ahead and swish that around a little bit, and then we're gonna use our rag and we're just gonna pat it off to make sure that it's nice and good to go. So we've used almost everything inside of here. We got both of our nibs, we used the red and we used the black ink. Now we're gonna give this glow in the dark a little bit of a try here because I've actually never used glow in the dark ink before, so it's gonna be a pretty fun little experiment. Similar to the shimmer inks, there is some little bit of a different something inside of here. I'm assuming this is gonna be kind of that glow in the dark portion of everything. The ink itself here is pretty white and milky, so we really just wanna make sure that all of this is really incorporated. So before we take off the cork or the top, we're gonna give it a good shake. And it might be a little difficult to see here because I do have just general light from around my space, but it is completely glow in the dark now and ready to go. Like I've mentioned, I've never used glow-in-the-dark ink before, so I'm not really sure exactly what this is gonna look like when it's all dry, but we'll do a little bit of movie magic and see what this looks like. All right, I've gone ahead and I've taken out as much light out of my room as I possibly can, and I'm not really seeing a whole lot when it came to this ink and being glow-in-the-dark. So we've talked about all the calligraphy ink, but let me just show you real quick what this looks like with fountain pen ink. Again, whether it's Archer and Olive or any other brand, you can certainly continue to use your nib holder and your nibs that you got a part of this in your journals with different types of ink. So we've taken a look at how to actually load the nib holder with that nib. We took a look at the 2 different types of nibs, as well as all of the different types of ink that came in this set as well. Personally, I'm obviously going to be leaning a little bit more towards the Blood Moon Red and the Black Soot over the Glow in the Dark. While I think that's a very cool, special thing that is definitely not something you're going to be using all the time. However, all of the other inks you can. And we even saw the sample of what those look like with regular fountain pen ink. Again, if that's just something that you have, especially like the Archer and Olive fountain pen ink that they've been selling recently, you can put this inside of your pen, or you can use these dip pen nibs and get the same exact effect what we saw with the calligraphy ink. So hopefully this all makes a little bit more sense to you and was helpful in your own personal calligraphy / dip pen journey from this box, or honestly any ink or nibs that you're finding out there in the world. But I have to hear from you. Let me know what you thought of this ink today and these nibs. Is this something you thought was very cool? Was it helpful? Or are you a little bit more interested in stuff around pens and ink? Let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to make more videos that might be more helpful for you as someone who's just getting into ink or has any special questions, because honestly, I love this stuff. Friends, I'll talk to you next time. See ya.